Welcome to Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell, simulcasting here at K-Talk Radio, and ready to get this morning's program underway. The 17th day, it's St. Patrick's Day. 17th day of March, 2025. I'm Jack Stockwell. Thank you for being a part of the program today. Just constant things going on. I have been very, very busy with my practice lately. I keep talking about how I want to do shorter segments on the stream over the weekend, because as I stop my politics stuff on Tuesday, there's so many things that happen over the next several days that could easily fill a 20, 25-minute spot. I am getting around to that. That is coming. I guarantee it. It's just it's going to take a little bit longer yet. So anyway, welcome this Monday morning. And as I said, there's a lot of things involved with my practice, especially the establishment of Jack's Packs. And I will be talking about that later in the program today. This is already starting to catch on nicely. It's just the little packs. You either use them or put them away so they're ready to go. Incredible heart support, and I want to talk more about heart support because it is just staggering. I have never been so stunned by the increasing level of heart attacks, not all of which are vaccine created, and the worsening condition of heart and cardiac function in even younger and younger people, including teenagers, that I'm picking up on this heart scan device. So we have a heart support pack. We have an immune cold flu support, digestion support, a foundational support to keep you healthy, a female support that I will get into a little bit later in the show. But it's a Monday morning and a lot of things to catch up on in today's program. And what we have now is the British, of course. You've got to love the Brits. They usually are a good indication as to what is going on around the planet that threatens the empire. And of course, the British Empire is not even a mere shadow of what it used to be. It's even less than a shadow. Britain is retreating into a tiny little island off the coast of France, bordered by Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. Not anything like it used to be. And so there are things in the foreground of the picture which are very decisive, but don't make the mistake of ignoring what is quietly going on behind the scenes or just out of view, because we could be in for a very nasty surprise from Great Britain. For example, Presidents Trump and Putin are expected to speak again this week, according to Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, to try to advance on their common commitment to end the Ukrainian war at the negotiating table. And both sides continue to refer to the engagements or the engages that have taken place between them so far as being productive, starting way back following Rubio and Lavrov in Riyadh. And they remain engaged despite every effort by the British and U.S. allies to derail this process. And the danger of nuclear war has receded markedly, at least the danger coming from that front, the danger that Biden was leading us into right up to the inauguration. And the situation in Southwest Asia is another matter, especially with the latest attacks on Yemen and the threats, the Trump's latest threats against Iran, if they continue to support the rebels in Yemen. Now, the British have turned their full attention to Europe, working through their City of London and Wall Street assets. When I say assets, I think BlackRock, or even the new Canadian Prime Minister, Carney, who was a former governor of the Bank of England, to wind up in the EU into a full Schachtian war buildup. What Schacht did for Hitler, and then march them east towards Russia. I mean, we're just having a rather interesting replay beginning to develop here. And as as unlikely as that might sound, at first blush, there's this serious discussion underway about developing and deploying what London's economist is calling the Euro bomb. I mean, at least it's time to start thinking again of the unthinkable. And so they wrote in a recent feature article that they suggest that Europe must be ready to fire nuclear missiles at Russian cities if the United States won't. That's what it's saying in British press. I'm not making that up. That kind of insanity is beyond even my imagination. And it wouldn't be the first time the British Empire tried a gambit like this. Back in the 1930s, the City of London's Montague Norman, governor of the Bank of England from 1920 through 1944, placed his protege, Hallmark Schacht, as I was just saying here, as the director of the German Reichsbank, and then as Hitler's economic minister. And Schacht issued unlimited amounts of worthless MEFO bill credit to finance Hitler's war machine, which was then turned eastward again, of course, towards the Soviet Union, which was its intention all along. Britain's attempt to build up. So Britain's attempt in World War I, a little background history. Britain created World War I simply to be able to break down the power of the German war machine and to break up the Kaiser, break up the effect of the Kaiser king of Germany type of government, and then to put the ridiculous Versailles Treaty requirements upon Germany, and to reorganize, and so with the idea of reorganizing German politics and reorganizing the German capabilities to eventually attack the Soviet Union, because England's desire to destroy Russia isn't just what's being expressed now by Starmer. It goes all the way back over 100 years ago, and even earlier than that. And so Europe has reacted to Trump's sudden signals for the end of the Ukraine war and a resumption of diplomacy with Russia with great panic, especially as centered in the City of London. And so what you're getting from various European cities now, of course, are enraged cries for war. If the United States isn't going to do it anymore, then we got to do it. Well, there's still time to correct this potentially fatal course, because if Europe wants to overcome its current economic misery, the way out lies in cooperation with the nations of the global South, which has long since become the global majority anymore. And humanity has finally reached a point where it must overcome the old patterns that were just steeped in geopolitics and Cold War thinking, and replace them with this new global security agreement and development architecture that takes into the account all the nations of this planet, not just the best wishes of the British Empire. So White House envoy Steve Witkoff told CNN's Jake Tapper yesterday that President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin will most likely speak this week on reaching an agreement around the ceasefire in the Ukraine war. Now, there's, as Putin said, yeah, well, there's some nuances. I'll get to those. But Witkoff reported, according to Axios, that he had a 4-hour meeting with Putin in the Kremlin on Thursday. That Witkoff met with Putin for 4 hours. Now, the allegation was made, I don't remember who said it, that there's a voice behind Rubio. Nothing against Rubio, but Rubio's kind of a front man. There's a stronger force behind Rubio. Remember when Witkoff started a lot of his earlier meetings, and when Trump had his earlier negotiations with Putin, he sent Rubio down to the Panama Canal when Rubio should have been right there in the middle of everything going on with Netanyahu, the Arab League, and the situation with Gaza. And now Rubio's playing a little bit more of a role, but Witkoff seems to be pulling out in front of Rubio in the sense of representing the political and foreign policy interests of the United States, especially when it comes to Russia. So Witkoff, in reporting his meeting with Putin and in the Kremlin, 4-hour meeting with Putin. Now just think about that. When's the last time you had a 4-hour meeting with somebody? I remember when church seemed like it was 4 hours. But what do you do during a 4-hour meeting? You probably have some light talk. Maybe you have dinner. You're talking over dinner. You've got your translators there. I don't know, Witkoff has been involved with this for so long, maybe he speaks Russian better than Putin's English. And but he came out saying, well, the meeting with Putin was very positive. He says the two sides are a lot closer than they were a few weeks ago. We narrowed the differences. So I suppose they both went in there with a little memo sheets. Cover this, make sure you cover this point. Don't give in on this point. This one we can bend a little, whatever, as Trump and whoever is behind Trump is preparing Witkoff for this meeting with Putin. Witkoff added that Trump is going to meet with his senior advisors as of this last Saturday, I think, expected to hold more meetings yesterday to narrow the differences even further, as reported in Truth Social. And he said, Trump said, we hope to see a ceasefire within weeks. So Trump narrowed the role that General Keith Kellogg would be playing moving forward, announcing on Saturday that he had appointed him as a special envoy to Ukraine. Kellogg had previously been the special envoy to Ukraine and Russia. But the Russians had made their distaste for Kellogg known to the American side in light of his overt, just absolutely overt pro-Ukrainian comments. And the fact that he was making comments as far back as a month ago that showed his incredible ignorance of Russia. So he's been pulled back a little bit. But the main thing this morning is what's going on in the Kursk region. Now, neither Zelensky nor the Ukrainian military authorities have yet ordered the Ukrainian soldiers in Kursk, who are surrounded, absolutely surrounded now by Russian forces, to surrender. So last week, President Trump had publicly requested of President Putin that he spare the lives of these Ukrainian troops. And Putin responded that he was prepared to do so, even though the Ukrainian and the foreign mercenary forces did not properly fall under Geneva Convention regulations. If the Ukrainians surrendered and turned over their weapons, Putin, speaking to an operational council with the permanent members of the Russian Security Council, said this: in order to effectively implement the call of the U.S. president, an appropriate order is needed from the military and political leadership of Ukraine to its military units to lay down their weapons and surrender. So now Zelensky has a different, I will get to Zelensky's response to this, because Zelensky is saying that they're winning in they're winning in Kursk, and that the Russians are on the run. So much slaughter. How can I laugh at so much slaughter? I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at this idiot, this clown. So ask March 15th, which would be Saturday, if Putin's order still stands. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, says, it's still in force. Their time is shrinking like shagreen skin. He pointed out, referring to Balzac's The Magic Skin story. So Dmitry Medvedev deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, was blunt about the alternative. He said, "This is a very humane approach by our country, but for Ukrainian Nazis, there's also a flip side. Should they refuse to lay down their arms, they will all be systematically and mercilessly eliminated." And as Putin was saying, some of these are mercenaries from other countries. You know, we find them, we destroy them. So in a post on Truth Social, probably Friday, Trump acknowledged that thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position. This would be a horrible massacre, not one seen since World War II. All right, now with Yemen, I've got more to say on Kursk. I just want to get some other things out of the way. A U.S. military operation against the Houthi forces in Yemen was carried out Saturday with strikes launched from the USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier and its accompanying warships. This came after the Yemeni armed forces had announced on March 12th that they would resume a ban on shipping in the Red Sea that was linked to Israel because of the reimposition of the Israeli blockade against Gaza, which is producing genocidal results as the genocide continues. So as of Sunday evening, last night, the Yemeni Health Ministry reported the death toll had climbed to 53, including 5 children with over 100 injured. And then Trump announced the attack on his Truth Social page. He said this: "Today I've ordered the United States military to launch decisive and powerful military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. They have waged an unrelenting campaign of piracy, violence, and terrorism against American and other ships, aircraft, and drones. Funded by Iran, the Houthi thugs have fired missiles at U.S. aircraft, targeted our troops and allies, and we will use overwhelming lethal force until we have achieved our objective." So then Trump directly addressed the Houthis. "Your time is up. Your attacks must stop, starting today. If they don't, hell will rain down upon you like nothing you have ever seen before." Then he went on to threaten Iran as well. He said, "To Iran, support for the Houthi terrorists must end immediately. Do not threaten the American people, their president, who has received one of the largest mandates in presidential history, or worldwide shipping lanes. If you do, beware, because America will hold you fully accountable and we won't be nice about it." So Trump's threats against Iran followed hot on the heels of a March 14th meeting in Beijing of the deputy foreign ministers of Iran, Russia, and China, trying to get some kind of a solution to the U.S.-Iran conflict. 1 week earlier, those same 3 countries launched their joint naval maneuvers around the Arabian port sea of Chabahar, Iran. So the Secretary of State Rubio spoke Saturday with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, according to an official American readout of the call, and, quote, informed Russia of U.S. military deterrence operations against the Iran-backed Houthis and emphasized that continued Houthi attacks on U.S. military and commercial shipping vessels in the Red Sea will not be tolerated. So the Russian Foreign Ministry readout said this: Sergei Lavrov, in response by the arguments of the American representative, stressed the need for all parties to immediately cease the use of force and the importance for all sides to engage in political dialogue so as to find a solution that will prevent further bloodshed. Now, that's just pure Russian. So both readouts reported that the parties had also discussed next steps to follow up on recent meetings in Saudi Arabia and agreed to continue working towards restoring communication between the United States and Russia. So it's noteworthy that yesterday that the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson blamed the United Kingdom for the ongoing attacks on Yemen and denounced the U.S. and U.K. military aggression against Yemen. And it's just, you know, it's what I've been saying for some time. I mean, it's been a British operation. And there was this thing floating around, I think it was on X over the weekend, of this fellow. Is it Adam? I don't remember who it was. That there are people who are utterly shocked that Israel was created much earlier than as a haven for post-World War II Holocaust survivors. Now, for over 20 years, maybe longer than that, on my programs, of course, it's 30 years now at K-Talk Radio, I've talked about the Balfour Declaration, and even that wasn't the beginning. I think, was it 1918? Sectioning up, along with the Sykes-Picot Treaty and the French efforts to section up the Middle East for the establishment of a Jewish state. And it's surprising to me how many people think that the UN created Israel as a refuge, a homeland, a new nation, so that the survivors of the Holocaust would have a place to go. I mean, they could stay in their homeland, or they could go and create a Jewish state, a Jewish homeland. Well, no, this stuff was figured out 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier, actually, from 1918 up to 1948, 47, 48, May 15th, 48, I think, was the final UN declaration of the State of Israel. It was just amazing to me that the people thought that Israel was created as a homeland for the Jews. No, it was created as a country largely sectarian in order to have ongoing conflict with its neighboring Arab populations and Christian populations to the north, so that they would be constantly at war with one another, so that the West could go in there and steal their damn oil. It never was an issue till they found out how much oil was in the Middle East. So anyway, what's my point? My point is that everything that's going there was created much earlier than May 15th, 1948. And for that very reason. And I don't know, it's like there's two kinds of people that I talk to, two different kinds of people that I have conversations like this with. Those who have a good idea what's going on, and those who watch evening news, and that's all they know. Now, there was there was a little aside here that I thought was really good. I get this from the Schiller Institute. This is really good. It's an open letter. You can't escape reality by demonizing Putin. How they want to blame everything that's wrong on Putin. And this giant Camachero, Giant Camachero, this letter that he wrote, fantasizing the decline of America and the demise of the dollar internationally, are all part of a twisted revenge concocted by Satan's representative himself, Vladimir Putin. And he said, it's a short letter here, but I want to read it to you because it's very good. It gets to the point. He says, "Silly me. I had naively believed that the downward spiral commenced in earnest with Nixon's 1971 move to junk the gold reserve system and to allow previously fixed currency exchange rates to freely float. This sharply vectored investment away from long-range industrial agricultural development to short-term quick speculation, while the U.S. infrastructure decayed, a huge mass of financial paper almost totally unconnected to any productive activity grew like a cancer. The mid-'80s legalization of financial derivatives, formally regulated under the same laws as casino gambling, accelerated this process, But the floodgates were completely opened with the 1999 repeal of Glass-Steagall, which in effect meant the Wall Street high rollers could pocket their winnings on super risky wagers but stick the taxpayers with the losses. The explosion of these operations that immediately followed led inexorably to the 2008 meltdown, and the U.S. policy since then indicates that our elected officials have learned little to nothing from their blunders as another crisis looms. But of course, those were my thoughts before reading the letter. Now I see the error of my ways. The entire policy drift decades came at the instigation of bad Vlad. Not only is Trump a Putin puppet, but so too is every American president dating back to when Russia's leader was in grade school. Are developing nations trading in their respective national currencies instead of the dollar? Don't dare blame the U.S. officials for repeatedly, arbitrarily imposing crippling economic sanctions on designated adversaries who conduct commerce in the world's reserve currency. Instead, pin it on Putin. How about the potential trade war between the U.S. and Canada? Again, all instigated by Moscow. Did the young lady that you asked out turn you down? Did the home team suffer a loss at the ballpark? Well, you know who's behind it all, Putin. Clearly, we must keep up the demonization of Putin and all things Russian without fail. The only alternative would be for Americans to acknowledge that the actual damage to our nation has emanated not from some nefarious external foe, but actually what we've done to ourselves. Absolutely unthinkable. Down with Putin. No, I thought that was very good. All the economic policies. I remember there in August 1971, I was still on my mission in Canada. And I remember some members of the LDS Church that I was talking to at the time who were Canadians. One of them, who was a banker, was awfully concerned about this gold thing. Well, I didn't know from, stuff from Shinola about any of this stuff at the time. I mean, I was raised in Washington, D.C. oriented high schools. All I knew in August of '71 was that Humphrey better win and get Nixon out of the White House. And then from there on, as it says, not just the what happened in 1971, but the overturning of Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall said, yeah, if you want to charter a bank and you want to get a bank, and if it does any dealing with pensions or mortgages, there can be no speculation with the revenues of that bank. If you want to get involved with some Wall Street banks that do a lot of speculation, that's fine. That's your choice. That's casino economics. If you want to get into that, that's your business. But the mainstay, the main chartered banks of the United States will not be allowed to do that stuff. And then, of course, Glass-Steagall was overturned in 1999 and under Clinton. And then look at what we've got today. Even the mortgage on my house went through 4 tranches before it finally ended up with Wells Fargo. I think Wells Fargo's the one that has it. And what happened in 2008, the big meltdown, Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and all the stuff that followed after that right up to 2012, because the dollar was unhinged. So in this letter, this guy said, no, it wasn't all those economic policies that drove American dollar down. It was Putin himself. Down with Putin. All right. A couple of comments about Mark Carney, Canada's new Prime Minister, speaking outside of Ottawa's Rideau Hall after being sworn as Prime Minister on last Friday, I think it was. Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, comes out, and his first topic that he's swinging at is Donald Trump. And he said this: "We will never, ever, in any way, shape, or form, be part of the United States," referring to Trump's constant talk about annexing Canada and his announcement of trade tariffs against the country. "America is not Canada. We are a very fundamentally different nation. Both the nature of Canada and the economics make Trump's idea unthinkable." He said, "We didn't ask for this fight, but Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves." He said, "Canada will win." And then earlier in the week, Ottawa imposed the 25% tariffs on tens of billions of dollars worth of American imports in retaliation to the 25% duty hikes that Trump had imposed on Canada. And Carney, of course, is a high-level British Empire operative. He was formerly governor of the Bank of England from 2013 to 2020, a post which is only entrusted to the most loyal imperial insiders. And he is known to be a personally close friend of King Charles. So you know what you can expect from that. All right, I've a couple of more things here about, well, the militarization. It's interesting what's happening in Germany already, and some of the other nations. Just war, war, war. And they've already started the whitewashing of Hitler. I heard a little bit of that on the program that preceded mine here at K-Talk. They've already started whitewashing Hitler. And, well, let me go. I've got some notes here on that. Vasily Prozorov, the former Ukrainian SBU officer who runs the Ukraine Leaks Telegram channel, ran a transcript of an article from Ruslan Pankratov, a former member of the Riga City Council, who was forced into exile for his opposition to honoring Nazi collaborators. Western parts of Ukraine still have statues to Nazi leaders, Bandera, of course, and several others. And he said this: "In Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, members of the government join these marches. It is considered that this is state policy. Although this is an organization of collaborators with blood on their hands, after the Great Patriotic War, they moved them to the U.S., speaking of the Nazis, where the CIA took them under its wing, and they were used as a battering ram for a future collapse of the Soviet Union. The current authorities of the Baltic countries come from precisely this environment. This is why this policy should be treated as fascist." And further on he says, "It is a profound misconception to think that something is happening in the Baltics and Brussels does not know. They all know perfectly well. All of this is hushed up because this is EU's very course. All of Europe is brown, and we must realize this." Now he's referring to brown shirts. "Only thanks to the special military operation have these masks been thrown off." Then he describes it's all cognitive warfare in defense of Hitler. He said, "The whitewashing of the Hitler regime begins. We are at the point where Hitler and Stalin regimes are compared. There's already an equal sign. Just a few years ago, this was simply impossible. And if we talk about the future, then Hitler will become an innocent, deceived man who fell into the intrigues of the evil Stalin. This is a cognitive weapon. This is hybrid war. Call it what you want. Reformatting is underway. Huge resources, thousands of top-class specialists, psychologists, teachers, historians, local historians, and anthropologists, all apologizing for Hitler. And the whitewashing of Hitler in this particular area of Eastern Europe is underway. Now, the peace talks. And the veil is coming down in Europe. Saturday's summit of 30 nations that was hosted by Keir Starmer saw the announcement that plans to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine has now entered an operational phase. "The world needs action," he said, "not a study, not empty words and conditions. Their actions are ostensibly aimed at increasing the pressure on Russia to come to the table. Why, one may ask, have the British become such staunch proponents of a ceasefire after having opposed it for 3 years. This is more than just a change in direction. This is significant. And any astute observer will have already realized when Starmer uses the word peace, when Macron uses the word peace, and others of this deranged school of thought, when you and I use the word peace, we would like to see peace take place. We'd like to see peace happen. World peace, peace between Democrats and Republicans in America. Peace just means kind of a cessation of hostilities, the absence of confrontation, the establishment of a quid pro quo kind of thing. We lay down our weapons, beat them into plowshares, and take care of the children. But when Starmer and Macron use the word peace, what they're referring to is war, which would actually be the result of deploying NATO troops into the Ukraine, which Putin has already said they would be military targets, regardless of what country they come from. And so Macron, who can't be in office too much longer, wants to send, what was it, 10,000, 20,000 troops, something like that, French troops into the Ukraine as peacekeeping forces. And the line, between the Russian offensive and the Ukrainian defensive is 2,000 kilometers. What does that work out to? At least 1,500 miles. And remember, Ukraine is as big as Texas. And so when Starmer is talking about the establishment of peacekeeping forces, he means war forces. Because they've already said if the United States isn't going to continue this war because Trump wants it stopped, then they have to do it. This is how crazy these people are. The Dutch government, which just last week had been one of the only EU countries opposing what Starmer and Macron are calling for, an 800 billion euro rearm Europe plan, finally caved in, and now they're going to support it. In Germany, the case is even more stark. The Constitutional Court in Germany has approved an anti-democratic move to ram through a 400 billion euro militarization package before the lame duck government leaves, and I think at the end of this month, rejecting several appeals for it to be stopped. So after years and decades of these same leaders having opposed federal spending for infrastructure and national development, why are they now changing their tune to fund hundreds of billions of euros for war? See, this war madness has got to stop. The world has this precious moment to realize a new era for mankind and move away from the British imperial geopolitics which brought on both world wars of the previous century. But if Europe descends into the status of this hand grenade that they can throw in the middle of these peace talks, it's going to be disastrous for the whole world. So Starmer is talking about his coalition of the willing. He says that President Zelensky has shown once again, beyond any doubt, that Ukraine is the party of peace. That Ukraine is the party of peace. Again, you need to substitute not the party of absence of aggression, but the party of war. When he says the party of peace, he means the party of war. He says Volodymyr, good old Volody, has committed to a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, but Putin's trying to delay it, saying there must be a painstaking study before a ceasefire can take place. Russia's not going to sit down with Zelensky. The only reason Zelensky's in the position he is because they're under martial law. They haven't had an election in some time. Zelensky's official role as president of the Ukraine ran out in May of last year, but because he had declared martial law, he kind of keeps that position going. And he says, well, what Starmer says this, what the world needs is action, not a study, not empty words and conditions. So my message is very clear. Sooner or later, Putin's going to have to come to the table. So this is the moment. Let the guns fall silent. Let the barbaric attacks on Ukraine once and all for all stop, and agree to a ceasefire now. And then he said, and then of course the coalition of the willing that he's calling together won't sit back and wait for Putin to act. Instead, we will keep pushing forward. This is madness. We agreed we will keep increasing the pressure on Russia, keep the military aid flowing to Ukraine, and keep tightening the restrictions on Russia's economy to weaken Putin's war machine and bring him to the table. These people they're either just bold-faced liars because they know what they're saying isn't true, or they're terminally stupid. Russia's economy right now is better than it's been in decades. They are producing in 1 month war munitions that takes Europe a year to do. The ruble is stronger than it was a few years ago. I don't have to get into all of that. It's just that this craziness, the absolute and now, of course, the German Constitutional Court, now that Merz is in there, remember, he was BlackRock's representative to Europe. Is clearing the way for the Bundestag to pass militarization package. Now, after World War II was over with, and Germany was recovering, and we had, the Marshall Plan and Lend-Lease and a whole bunch of other things to help Germany rebuild its productive capability. And Germans, for some reason, just have a knack with this kind of engineering innovation stuff. But when the rebirth of Germany started to take place post-war, they had changes to their constitution, and one of which, imposed by the Western powers, your army can only be so big. The same thing that happened with Versailles, only this time the Germans pretty well followed it. And one of the things that helped to temper Germany's worries over whether or not they would have sufficient self-defense capability was the implementation of all of these bases, Western power bases, mostly American, of course, in the Russian territory or the German territory. So there have been several appeals that have gone past the Constitutional Court to stop Merz, ever since he started talking about this, to mandate the new Bundestag, the German army, be convened, the government be convened before an appeal that would stop the militarization of Germany occur. Well, I don't want to bore you with all the other details involved with this, but the Bundestag is going to convene tomorrow, where it's expected there will be enough votes from the CDU, the SPD, the Greens, that the constitutional debt brake cannot be overridden and the measure carried. Now, according to Bild, very B-I-L-D, a very well-read paper in Germany, they're also going to put in climate neutrality into the Constitution. The last time we had a constitutional convention was over equal rights, wasn't it? The ERA, equal rights as a possible amendment to our Constitution. Now, Germany, poor Germany, now has two issues coming before their Constitutional Court. One of which is to raise the debt ceiling so the military can be expanded beyond constitutional boundaries. And then also, for the Greens, they want to get in there for climate protection. So the Greens have persuaded Merz, and Merz could not have won the election without the support of the Greens, to ensure that Parliament has decades of constitutional requirements working towards only emitting as many greenhouse gases that can be offset by the trees. I don't know if someone went through the entire German nation and counted the trees, and then you'd have to count the leaves that convert greenhouse gases to oxygen. They want that in the Constitution. They want in the Constitution the eventual climate protection aspects that would limit the amount of greenhouse gases produced by German industry, that to not exceed the ability of the trees to convert it to oxygen. I mean, there are people who actually are purporting this. So, I'm quoting here from Jan Schnellenbach of the University of Cottbus. He says, if this is included in the basic law, it is expected that the Federal Constitutional Court will prevent investments, slow down growth, or reject it altogether. Environmental groups could then take legal action against any investment. Every highway innovation would be in jeopardy and would have disastrous consequences. I can't prove it, but I'm willing to bet this originated in the City of London. This is just, can you imagine that happening here? Can you, I've often thought if Harris had won and Trump lost, where would we be now with the fourth term of Obama? Just plowing on further and further in some of these most ridiculous ideas. And could there not be? Because if Harris had won, they would probably have a Democrat majority in both houses. What could they have ended up passing as federal law? And wouldn't it be possible if the Germans could be so stupid as to even consider such a climate protection bill that would limit greenhouse gases to what the trees could convert? Like somehow they would pump the exhaust of some combustives into a forest. I mean, those gases, as a result of production, are hot. They're going to go up in the atmosphere. How are they? They're going to go up there and collect them and have some giant vacuum tube sucking them down into a local grove of trees. I know that's ridiculous, but it's no more ridiculous than the idea that they would limit industry to what the trees could convert to oxygen. Well, I don't know. It just, and it's Germany, for Pete's sake. Well, U.S. President Trump is optimistic that Russian President Vladimir Putin is going to agree to the ceasefire in the Ukraine war. Now, it could be as early as tomorrow, as late as Thursday. But when he was asked on Full Measure with Cheryl Atkinson, on the 14th, that Friday, I think, whether he has any plans in case Russian President Putin doesn't agree to the ceasefire, Trump said, bad news for the world, because so many people are dying in the Ukraine, and I think he's going to agree. I really do. I think I know him pretty well, and I think he's going to agree. Well, you may end up with some egg on your face, President Trump. So the Kremlin spokesman Peskov told TASS yesterday that Putin's offer to the Ukrainian troops in the Kursk area to lay down their arms still stands, but time's running out. Still in force, he said, their time is shrinking like shagreen skin. I mentioned that earlier. So I just think of a couple of the scenes from the Book of Mormon, those of you who are familiar with it, where the armies of the Nephites had surrounded the armies of the Lamanites. And they even describe how the Lamanites were just shaking from fear of annihilation. And Captain Moroni made them an offer. Lay down your weapons and swear you will never take up arms against us again, and you can go home. And so I don't know how, whether Putin has listened to the Mormon missionaries or not, as they proselyte on Ukraine or on Kremlin grounds. But I thought that would be a tremendously beautiful humanitarian thing for Putin to do, even though there are people there who absolutely do not belong there, let alone the Ukrainians, the mercenaries, the foreign mercenaries, of whom a lot of them are Americans. We know that. There are Americans in this group about to be destroyed. One little Orishnik missile in the middle of them would take care of it. And whether or not Putin, you know, as he said, there's certain nuances in the ceasefire. And I'll tell you what those nuances are. They're not going to give up any territory. They're not going to allow peacekeeping forces. Ukraine has to demilitarize and write into their constitution that they never, ever will ever become a part of NATO. I don't know how many times Putin, Lavrov, Peskov, Gerasimov, and Medvedev and Maria, another spokesperson, anyway, have said what the conditions are for peace in the Ukraine. And I'm not sure what to think about Trump, because Trump, you know, the art of the deal kind of thing, and always says outlandish stuff. We're going to take back the canal. We're going to take back Greenland. I'm going to tell you what the local Greenland vote was here in a few minutes about whether the United States is going to end up with Greenland or not. Because a vote was taken throughout the population of Greenland. I'll tell you what it was here in a few minutes. And what else? Annex Canada. Turn the Gaza into Trump Riviera, you know, all these crazy things that he knew would never happen. But that's how he opens the negotiations. And then he says, I think I can sit down with Putin and get this ceasefire going. Well, if Witkoff spends 4 hours with Putin last Thursday night, and Witkoff does not know by now what the Russian nuances are for a ceasefire, and he hasn't informed Trump by now. I mean, that's ridiculous. Of course they have. Trump knows exactly what Putin is going to accept and not accept. But on the outside, Trump's saying, yeah, we're going to go there and we're going to figure this out and get it done. Now, Vice President Vance had some interesting things to say on the Laura Ingraham show the other day, on Friday in a Fox interview, whether she asked him whether he was driving a wedge between the U.S. and Europe with some of the things he said because of what he said there at the Munich Security Conference. And Vance said this: the entire idea of Christian civilization that led to the founding of the United States of America was formed in Europe. The cultural bonds, the religious bonds, these things are going to last beyond political disagreements. But I think that Europe, and frankly, I have said this about America a year ago, is at risk of engaging in civilizational suicide. Then he singled out Europe's problems with border control and free speech. Same thing we're having here. I think our border control problems are coming to an end, but now we're having some real problems with free speech. And I don't see it getting any better. But he said they are unable or unwilling, too many countries, to control their borders. You see them starting to limit the free speech of their own citizens, even as those citizens are protesting against things like the border invasion that got Donald Trump and a number of European leaders elected. I want Europe to thrive. I want them to be an important ally. Part of that is going to be Europe respecting its own people and respecting its own sovereignty, and America can't do the job for them. And I like how he called it civilizational suicide. Now, is the U.S. going to attack drug cartels in Mexico? I've got some notes on that I thought are pretty good. A lot of this stuff I collect over the last several days from various sources. I like Schiller Institute and the stuff that they publish. And I like Consortium News. And I like Global Research. And I like antiwar.com, and I like Napolitano's podcast guests. And it's a full-time job just to stay up on this kind of information. So Ronald Johnson, Trump's nominee to be the U.S. ambassador to Mexico, told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee this week, quote, all cards are on the table. When he was asked, is Trump going to attack inside sovereign Mexican territory the drug cartels? And he said, all cards are on the table, including unilateral military action when it comes to dealing with the Mexican drug cartels. He said this. No, this is Senator Chris Coons at a Senate meeting hearing for 3 of President Donald Trump's ambassador nominees. Sovereignty is a core principle. I understand that the designation of the drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations reflects widespread concern and anger in the United States about the cartels and the impact of fentanyl. Would you agree that we should not take any military action against cartels in Mexican territory without the knowledge and consent of the Mexican government? So Johnson, Ronald Johnson, Trump's ambassador nominee for Mexico, and he's an Army veteran. He's a former CIA official who served as ambassador to El Salvador during Trump's first term as president, said he believed that on any decision to take action against a cartel inside Mexico, our first desire would be that it be done in partnership with our Mexican partners. That said, I know that President Trump takes very seriously his responsibility to safeguard the lives of U.S. citizens, and should there be a case where the lives of U.S. citizens are at risk, I think all cards are on the table. Well, what does the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, have to say about this? She said this right after that was made public. We don't agree. He said everything's on the table. Well, no, it isn't. She said at her morning press conference yesterday. Not everything is on the table, nor on the chair, nor on the floor, nor anywhere else, not that. But she said Mexico is open to collaboration with the U.S. We collaborate within a framework of respect. We coordinate with each other. There is, in fact, very good coordination. There is very good coordination because there is respect between both countries, and there is collaboration within the framework of our sovereignty. We're going to continue collaborating, coordinating. If he's ratified by the Senate, there will be a good relationship with the ambassador, but as we've said, Mexico will be respected. So how do you feel about that? You think if, when you consider that the only reason the Ukrainians have made the defense of their country, the Ukraine, last as long as it has, and that could only be done by American satellite coverage, so that American intelligence would tell Ukrainian intelligence where the enemy is. If that's that good over there, what do we have over here? Does our our intelligence allow us to locate where these bad guys are? Remember the movie Clear and Present Danger? Harrison Ford playing Jack Ryan. And how through intelligence gathering, on the ground, radio surveillance and satellite stuff, they were able to locate a hideout, not a hideout, but a home of one of the drug cartel leaders, and several other drug cartel leaders all got together for a drug cartel leader meeting. And the United States rather surreptitiously sent in a bomb to take them all out, which it did, as well as children. And then all the hell that broke out once it turned out to be an American weapon that killed these people. My whole point is, I realize that's a Tom Clancy novel. Tom Clancy has some pretty good intelligence connections so that when he writes another story, the word on the street from working or past working CIA operatives say, no, his description is pretty good, pretty accurate as to how all this intelligence stuff works. Wouldn't we know? Can't we know really fast where these people are located? Now, before you answer that, wouldn't the same thing apply in Gaza to locate Hamas operatives? No, it wouldn't, because the Hamas operatives are not on the ground. They're down deep, hundreds of feet underground in tunnels. They only come up when it's necessary to come up and combat something. How easy is it going to be to find these narco operatives? And is Trump going to send missiles in, as they did in Clear and Present Danger, to take them out with a well-placed, very precise, huge bomb? If we haven't given away all of our 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, I don't know yet, but maybe some of them can be used. All right. Mehmet Oz, remember him running for the Senate against Fetterman in Pennsylvania? Lost. Not by a whole lot. America's largest union of registered nurses, the National Nurses United, issued this press statement back on the Friday, calling on the U.S. Senate to reject the confirmation of Dr. Mehmet Oz as Director of Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And whoever leads that agency is a matter of life and death, they said, for 147 million Americans who rely on Medicare or Medicaid. Their opposition to Oz is based on his advocacy of privatizing these public services, and he would be charged with overseeing that privatization. And the union details how Oz has promoted eliminating the popular traditional Medicare program and instead forcing patients to rely on private for-profit insurers. The union warns that should Oz win the confirmation, he will be in several conflicts of interest in which he would be in a position to personally make large profits from his privatization plans, as well as similar moves, all at the expense of the most vulnerable people. The union said this, Nancy Hagans, the president of the nurses union. Vulnerable children and families, pregnant patients, people with disabilities, and our nation's seniors who have worked hard and paid into the system all their lives deserve high-quality care. They won't get it with Dr. Oz directing the CMS. The American Medical Association has also been critical of him and states that Oz is visibly out of step with his profession, and they have criticized several of his claims. So I thought that was kind of interesting. All right, now, Zelensky and Kursk and the Ukrainian troops in Kursk. As the U.S. intelligence and the Russian intelligence have released, pretty much the same news release, The Ukrainian forces in Kursk are now completely surrounded by Russian forces that are moving in from all directions. And Putin is to make a comment on this here today or tomorrow about what his intention is, because many of these are the old Azov battalion bastards and have Nazi insignia on their uniforms and have committed horrible crimes against the Russian residents who lived in this area, allegedly. And that they're completely surrounded, and that if they don't surrender, they will be destroyed. Now, as of Saturday, Zelensky indicated zero interest in saving his troops, whom the Russians have currently surrounded. As reported by UK Inform, Zelensky has translated as having said this: "The situation in the Kursk region is clearly very difficult. The task of the Kursk operation was to draw troops from Pokrovsk, Kharkiv, and Sumy. Our guys are absolutely heroic. They should take a strong bow." Then further, a variety of Kyiv's military analysts, as of Saturday night, were denying any encirclement of Ukrainian troops into Kursk, explaining that the Kursk operation was a success and that the Ukrainian troops there may now create a buffer zone on the border. This is what the Ukrainians are reporting. So Zelensky's details include this: the pressure was first to subside in the Kharkiv region, tear off their troops from there to the Kursk region as much as possible. Then they began to take it from the eastern direction, but did not leave their main task, Pokrovsk. We understand all this. It's just strong people who understand that at some point there was a chance that the Russians could stop in the Pokrovsk direction, and so it happened. Pokrovsk direction, the situation is stabilized, as well as in the Kharkiv direction. Excuse me. Zelensky said that Saturday, that they have the upper hand. Such is the efforts of propaganda. It's I don't know. It's growingly hilarious, except for the remaining Ukrainian troops, whether they surrender or not, because Putin is very clear on the subject. They don't surrender, they will be destroyed. And to surrender, they have to leave their weapons, and I think they have to go over to the Russian side. I don't think they're going to be allowed to go back to the Ukraine until they have been debriefed. Sometimes it's not enough to just have somebody lay down their weapons and go home, especially with the technological aspects of warfare today. You're going to talk to these guys. Yeah, here's a hot meal. Here's a shower. Go get a hot shower. Here's a hot meal. Get some rest. And then we're going to have a little talk. And after our little talk is done, if you want to go home to the Ukraine, you can. If you want to stay here, you can stay here. Now, President Trump, in a Truth Social posting on Saturday, said that his special envoy, Steve Witkoff's meeting with Putin at the Kremlin, reported, he said, "We had a very good and productive discussion. And then with Putin, there's a very good chance that this horrible, bloody war can finally come to an end." And then he said this, Witkoff said this: "At this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position." Then Trump said, "I have strongly requested to President Putin that their lives be spared. This would be a horrible massacre, not one since seen since World War II. God bless them all. So earlier, the Kremlin spokesperson Peskov confirmed the fact of the meeting, but not its content. Witkoff said was received by President Putin late last night and provided additional information to Russia. Putin conveyed information and additional signals to President Trump via Witkoff. Then, of course, as you know, Trump is supposed to be involved with that this week, probably by Thursday. So National Security Advisor Mike Waltz told Fox News Hannity on Thursday night that the Trump administration is discussing various options with Russia and Ukraine to resolve the conflict, including the presence of European troops. This is just nuts. Waltz said this: "We are having these discussions with our counterparts, the Russians. We are having these discussions with our counterparts, the Ukrainians. And President Trump, the deal maker in chief, is determined to end this war." Then Hannity suggested that the Ukraine be a part of NATO is not going to happen, and that Donbass and other areas will end up in Russia in any negotiated settlement. He said, "We're discussing all those things with both sides, and we are pushing both sides together with President Trump." Then Putin responds to Trump's request to spare the Ukrainian soldiers, and prefacing a weekly meeting of the permanent members of Russia's Security Council, the main topic which was restoring Russian-American relations, President Putin responded last Friday morning on a post by President Trump on Truth Social, appealing how the Russian Federation to spare the lives of the Ukrainian soldiers now surrounded by Russian troops in the Kursk region, and made clear the conditions under which that would be possible. This is what Putin said. "Before we begin our work, I would like to say that we have noted today's appeal by the U.S. President, Mr. Trump, to spare the lives of the Ukrainian servicemen blocked by Russian forces in the Kursk region incursion zone. In this context, we make it a point that Ukrainian militants have committed numerous crimes against the civilian population in the incursion zone. These acts, as I have already mentioned, are qualified as terrorism by the Prosecutor General's office at the Russian Federation. Still, we understand President Trump's call to be guided by humanitarian considerations in treating these service members. In that regard, I stress that if they lay down their arms and surrender, they will be guaranteed life and dignified treatment as per international law and Russian legislation." I've got more here, Lavrov, what he had to say about it, but you get the idea. And they're supposed to meet. They're supposed to be meeting here rather quick. Now, all eyes are directed, of course, on the resolution of this Ukrainian crisis, following a real effort by the Western media and the politicians to try to set up Putin by luring him into a situation where he would reject Trump's so-called ceasefire offer. Because Trump, just think about this and the political play that's going on here. Trump goes over as the great peacemaker. He got the ceasefire in Gaza. He, as of yesterday, is putting, the Yemenis and the Iranians in their place with his threats and verbal threats. He's done more in the almost 2 months he's been in office than the last president had in 4 years. Very productive, gets things done, and now he's going to get the big thing done and go over and get Putin to agree to a ceasefire. Now think how important that public relations image would be. If Trump could do what he did with Netanyahu, do it with Putin. Putin has already made clear, they've won the war, for Pete's sake. You don't sit down with the leader of a nation that just won the war and tell them what their concessions are going to be. So there are still thousands of Ukrainian soldiers surrounded by Russian troops in the Kursk region who right now are having their lives spared. But obviously that is now on the table, and what Putin has said before was he didn't really answer no to the request for a ceasefire. He just pointed out all the difficulties that have to be addressed, namely that there's a 2,000-kilometer front line, and that if the ceasefire would only be used to regroup and rearm the Ukrainians, train fresh recruits, then obviously that's not very productive and no security guarantee could possibly be arranged. But nevertheless, they've gotten to a point where this is a major breakthrough. You consider the fact that right up to the day of inauguration, President Biden had not spoken to Putin in over 2 years. So you get the fact that Trump and Putin are speaking directly. And then Witkoff was over there getting Putin up to date on what Trump is going to want. And then Putin telling Witkoff what he will put up with, and he'll get back to President Trump to tell him what the possibilities are. It's still a very promising sign. Now, the way I look at this is a big step down from the nuclear confrontation that Biden was leading this war into. And especially after he ascended to have these long-range missiles delivered to the Ukraine. Long-range missiles that can deliver nukes deep into the Russian Federation. Now, all this stuff is stepping back. And so Putin stopped the flow of weaponry, the flow of money, everything into the Ukraine. Yes, I know, he just reversed that the other day. The streams are open again. Why would he do that just before he meets with Putin? But it doesn't mean at all that we're out of the dynamic, the nuclear dynamic, which is extremely dangerous. And with all these elements now pushing for the remilitarization of Europe, especially what's coming out of Germany, it's just breathtaking. There's so many elements. For example, Polish President Duda is now demanding nuclear weapons for Poland. You think Putin's going to put up with that? He wants nuclear weapons in Poland. He wants to double the Polish army from 250,000 to 500,000. And more fundamentally is the effort to spread this beyond Poland throughout all of Europe, which is what Her Excellency von der Leyen is doing. And this is the idea that on March 19th, there's going to be some Euro bond that's going to be issued to finance all of this. So America stopping down in supporting the war with Ukraine and now stepping back in again here the other day when Trump turned on the two flows, armament and money, back into the Ukraine, just previous to him sitting down with Putin. Was that a bargaining chip that he was willing to, he reinstated it so he could give it up when he meets with Putin? I mean, that was my first thought. I mean, that was so obvious. If I could figure that out, certainly Putin would. But Putin is handling this thing very differently. The so-called news, the good news is that President Trump put out on his Truth Social channel that he had just recently had, by phone, a very good discussion with Putin. And he thinks based on that there's a very chance that the war can finally come to an end. Well, there's still thousands of Ukrainians surrounded by Russian troops in the Kursk region who are in a very bad position. But obviously that is now on the table, and what Putin has said before was he didn't answer no to the request for a ceasefire, but he pointed to a lot of the difficulties which have to be addressed. Namely, again, that there's this 2,000-kilometer front line, and if the ceasefire time would only be used to regroup and rearm the Ukrainians, train fresh recruits, that obviously this would be counterproductive and therefore security guarantees would have to be arranged. But nevertheless, this is still a major breakthrough because the fact that Trump and Putin are speaking directly And also, Special Envoy Witkoff apparently was in Moscow yesterday, briefing Putin on the details of the discussion in Saudi Arabia. So this is an extremely promising sign. Now, I emphatically want to say it's just the worst edge of the strategic crisis, which has calmed down. That's all. The nuclear threat is the only thing that's different here. It's calmed down a little bit. It doesn't mean that we're out of that dynamic, which is an extremely dangerous position to be in. Now, you think about that. When Trump and Putin meet, it's either tomorrow or it could be as late as Thursday, they both want to come out as champions, shaking hands, arm in arm. We've got this figured out. Now, how can that happen with Putin's insistence they will not give up any territory, that the Ukrainians have to demilitarize and denuclearize and denaziize, and that Russia will keep all of their occupied territories? Maybe that's why it takes 4 hours. We're just arguing and arguing over one point. Now, the Bundestag just had an agreement over the weekend on the military budget, on the precondition to now enter into coalition negotiations with other nations of the willing, as MERS is calling them. But the whole European situation is really geared towards militarization. For example, Rheinmetall, which is the largest German weapons producer, just announced that they're probably taking over a plant from Volkswagen, which was supposedly cut down or shut down in Osnabrück because of the crisis in the car industry. So they want to produce tanks and other things at this plant. And guess who is the largest shareholder in Rheinmetall? Rheinmetall is the largest military-industrial complex in Germany. Who's the majority shareholder of that company, Rheinmetall? Well, yeah, it's BlackRock, which MERS was the previous chairman of the board of the German section. Before, and now he's chancellor candidate and probably will be chancellor in the next German government. And along with that, you've got Macron offering a nuclear umbrella to all of Europe. There is this hysteria going on in Europe right now that's absolutely unprecedented. And it's becoming a major, major problem. It's clearly an operation which has got to be turned from its current course, because we might be right back to swapping nuclear weapons again, even if Trump does pull off a ceasefire. Especially if Trump does pull off a ceasefire. Then Europe, that is just hell-bent on war with Russia, will just continue. Now, the USA is turning from being an ally and productive power into a security risk for Europe. But if Trump and Putin can settle down this Ukraine crisis, a lot of wind will be taken out of the sails of these people who are desperately bent on war with Russia. Now, it's obvious that the other major crisis point in the situation of the world situation this morning, of course, is Gaza. There have been little steps in the right direction with the Egyptian Arab-backed Gaza reconstruction plan, which has now been endorsed by Haaretz, because the Israeli government immediately rejected it. But at the same time, the horrible events in Gaza and the West Bank are continuing. There is now a new United Nations Commission of Inquiry report, which was finally released yesterday. And this report states that the Israeli intentionally attacked and destroyed the Palestinian territory's main fertility center, imposing a siege and blockade, including medication for ensuring safe pregnancies, deliveries, and neonatal care. This is going on right now. It obviously is reflecting the situation in the Middle East crisis is absolutely far from being over. Then the other things to look at are that in Panama, President Trump announced that he is not excluding even the military option to take back control of the canal. And with respect to Greenland, which just had an election where the party won, which wants more independence for Greenland, not only are they turning down the United States' offer to become a part or territory of the U.S., now they want complete independence from Denmark. But President Trump again said the United States needs Greenland and that it's going to happen, that he talked to Denmark. Denmark naturally doesn't want to give over authority of Greenland, so this remains somewhat worrisome because I don't think the United States needs Greenland. We don't. And the principle of sovereignty should be respected everywhere, no matter if a country is big, small, or has very few people in it. Like the entirety of the size of Greenland, I think, has 55,000 people, almost all on the coast, of course. So where does this leave us? I think that the establishment of Europe, which was a NATO-picked, NATO-dominated establishment for a long time, and now with Trump in the White House, the dominance of NATO in Europe is waning, and the dominance of power and control in Europe is switching immediately back to the British. And the European Union, in that sense, always was the local or the regional version of the British Empire. And that color is now coming out by those who are on this multi-militarization course. But against that, there's all these other tendencies. If you look at Eastern Europe, it's not as unified as Western Europe is, because you have Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania. They even tried to annul the election in Romania. Nevertheless, the presidential candidate who had the most votes is anti-EU and pro-Russia. Then in Georgia, you have a very mixed situation. Despite the fact that the Maidans are going on in many of these countries, you still have a very strong voiced population who does not think along European Union lines. And then Croatia just won an election overwhelmingly on that same profile. Serbia is not European Union, but nevertheless part of the combination. And Austria, also a candidate that is actually on the same kind of profile. Just by machinations, they prevented the head of Austria from becoming the new head of state. So the dynamic is very mixed. I think Italy is sitting on the fence. Meloni has voiced some sentiments that she wants to be a bridge between the United States and Europe, so that's very far from being unified. So I do not give up hope about the identity of Europe. But one of the reasons why I think it's worth fighting for Europe is because if you look at the longer arc of history, Europe has something very important to contribute, and that is emphatically European classical culture. Everything from the Italian Renaissance to the German classical period to the Danish classical period. There were many countries, even between Poland and Lithuania. You had the act, I forget the name, which fought for a constitution 300 years before the American Revolution and had many of the same principles. As early as the late 1400s, 1500s, in the area between Poland and Lithuania, cries for the overthrow of the monarchies and the establishment of an independent nation, 300 years before 1776. That's why Europe has a tremendous identity to maintain, a rich tradition that would all be lost and be a shame for mankind if they have to launch this war with Russia. Now, I'm not an agent for Putin. I'm not an agent for Trump. That's an insult. Someone called me a Putin puppet not too long ago in email, and I take offense at that. It's an insult. But I think it's extremely important that I continue with what I'm trying to do here to convince these poor, misguided people who are believing in the mainstream media. And that they really are unbelievable. And in Germany, you can't turn on a news item, family program, soap opera, religious program, where they haven't put in something horrible about Russia. And I expect to see that here any time. And something nice about Ukraine. I just saw that actually on the local news this morning on Fox 13. Something is happening where they have all of this pro-Ukrainian stuff. Now, I don't mind some relief stuff being developed and organized for Ukraine, especially those poor soldiers about to be slaughtered. But it's 24-hour brainwashing is just going on, is continuing. Not only is there continuing brainwashing for unneeded vaccines. You see the latest thing about measles? Now there's over 300 identified cases. Do you know how many cases of serious flu exist in Salt Lake County? Far more threatening to health than measles. But every time they come out and talk about the increasing number of measles cases, they never talk about how many people have died from it. Because the number's so small, they're not going to talk about it. I think there would, there's a lot of good people. There's a lot of good people who their voices are beginning to be heard in all these various countries that are sick and tired of the colonial crap that's been going on for hundreds of years coming out of the city of London. And if I think this big freak out that Vice President Vance said in Munich, where Europeans no longer have free speech. And if you dare to say anything that's against the official narrative, they have raids against pensioners at 6 o'clock in the morning because somebody posted something on social media that wasn't very subversive. It was just an opinion. But because free speech is dying in Europe, people are being picked up because of things that they said on social media that wasn't pro-kill the Russians. And I would think that if more people, more journalists, more talk show people in Europe would focus on what Vice President Vance said, that there's no more democracy in Europe, I think that would greatly help. It's the neoliberals who are the real dictators. They want to impose their paradigm, just like they did here for 4 years under Biden. And many countries around the world don't like that. For example, Russia doesn't like it, Hungary doesn't like it, China doesn't like it, the Africans don't like it. Because when you have European politicians traveling in all of these countries as far as they still can, they're not welcome anymore. And Africans are telling these Western interventionists who are there pushing their LGBTQ values, Africans are telling them to shut up and get out because it violates their traditions. So I think the more the discussion whether the sort of democracy is really a reflection of democracy, it's more the opposite. I think for a long time, if you would look at the Europeans and the Africans, the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, the dynamic looks completely stuck. But if you look at the global south and the BRICS plus, these are countries that are far from being Indonesia, for example, will soon surpass Germany as the third largest economy in the world. That's a big factor. Indonesia, right behind the United States and China. Third largest economy. Then you have a lot of these other countries that are very sizable and the whole momentum of the Africans, so that you bring in the BRICS more as a conscious decision and have their voice heard. I think they're absolutely crucial as a new element in the strategic equation here, because the Europeans pretend that Africa doesn't exist. Or sometimes they say, oh, yeah, those BRIC countries. And instead they say, well, why don't we start diplomatic relations now and squeeze out the Russians and the Chinese from the global south? Well, the train left that station a long time ago, buddy. Because the countries of the global south have made up their minds as to who's on what side of history at this point. They have a long history of what the Soviet Union did in their fight for independence and what the Europeans did. So I don't think that's going to work. But if you bring in the third world bloc, which is today the reincarnation of the non-aligned movement in the form of BRICS Plus, and as Nehru and Sukarno said back in 1955 at the Bandung Conference, they have the right to have a voice because if it ever comes to nuclear war, they'd be just as dead as the people in the West. Maybe 2 weeks later, but they would still be just as dead. Therefore, they have a right to speak and bring in their own weight. And according to some websites of the Oxford University, they are 85% of the world population who think this way. So, given the fact that you already have the Chinese and the Russians talking about an international order, you know, we absolutely are at the moment of history where we have to overcome geopolitics. Geopolitics was the germ of world wars since the 20th century, and it led to terrible wars. And we have to overcome the idea that you can have a country or a group of countries who have a legitimate interest against another country or a group of countries, so they can pursue that interest. They can pursue that interest with all means, including military. And that's a very deadly idea, which we have to overcome by really redefining a new paradigm in international relations. So, what's going to come out of this meeting between Trump and Putin could set the stage for continued, you know, just increasing realization that something has to happen in order for some level of sanity to take place and be established that will allow for a new world of peace, a whole new world of development, a whole new world of harmony and cooperation on this planet. And I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna, but I really think that's what Trump is all about. And I think Trump really does want peace. He really does want to see the establishment of a security architecture that will protect Russia at the same time protect Europe. There was this attempt at one time. Remember, shortly after Putin got into office, there was an attempt on his part to become a member of NATO. Now, all eyes are trained now in these last few minutes. Well, thanks. This is good. Thanks, Paul. Do you think Putin did this? Paul just sent me this text. This is with AI. If you went to AI, Meta, ChatGTP, whatever, and you said, list Russia's conditions of a ceasefire with Ukraine. I've listed 3 or 4 that were the main ones. Says, okay, let's tackle this query about Russia's conditions for a ceasefire with Ukraine. The user wants a list, so I need to extract all the conditions mentioned in the search results and present them clearly. First, looking at the search results, one from the Institute for the Study of War mentions that Russia may demand a halt to weapons supplies to Ukraine as a condition. It also states that Putin's proposed ceasefire would require Ukraine to stop recruiting and training personnel, which would disarm Ukraine over time. Additionally, Russia wants to continue its own military activities like recruitment and equipment production while preventing Ukraine from doing the same. This is a key point because it creates an asymmetric situation favoring Russia. Result 2 is a YouTube video from stuff.co.nz. The transcript mentions that Russia presented an exhaustive list of conditions. It includes international recognition of Russia's claims to Crimea and 4 Ukrainian provinces, a guarantee that Ukraine won't join NATO, and the exclusion of European peacekeeping forces in the Ukraine. Also, Trump mentioned discussing territorial concessions which might relate to Russia's demands for land control. And that's the main things that I have been promoting here. Result 3 is another YouTube video from Sky News. Putin here raises questions about how the ceasefire would be enforced, like controlling mobilization and weapons supplies during the ceasefire. He emphasizes the need for discussions with Trump, indicating that verification mechanisms and control over ceasefire violations are part of the conditions. Putting this all together, the main conditions from Russia are halt to Western military aid, stop weapons supplies to the Ukraine, Ukraine's demilitarization, cease recruitment, training, and rearmament, territorial recognition, international acknowledgement of Crimea and 4 Ukrainian provinces as Russian, NATO accession ban, Ukraine must never join NATO, from exclusion of European peacekeepers, no European forces in the Ukraine, asymmetric military activity, Russia can continue its military efforts while Ukraine cannot, and from verification and control mechanisms, questions about enforcing the ceasefire, monitoring violations, and control over mobilization. I need to structure these points clearly using headers and bullet points. Each condition should be concise with citations from the relevant sources. Also note that Putin's approach is to set conditions that favors Russia's long-term goals, making the ceasefire a tool to weaken Ukraine rather than a genuine peace effort. Russia's proposed conditions for a ceasefire with Ukraine, as outlined in recent reports and statements, include several demands that heavily favor Russian interests while undermining Ukraine's ability to defend itself. Key conditions include core demands and halt to Western military aid, immediate cessation of weapons supplies to the Ukraine, prohibition on Ukraine's recruitment, training, and rearmament during the ceasefire. No deployment of European peacekeeping forces in the Ukraine, because Putin has already said they will immediately become targets. Russia would retain the ability to continue military recruitment, equipment production, and receive foreign aid, while Ukraine is barred from similar activities. This creates a scenario where Russia would resume offenses with enhanced capabilities after the ceasefire. I don't think so. I think Putin's serious about this. He doesn't want the war. He doesn't want it to go on. He doesn't want to see any more dead Russians, let alone dead Ukrainians. Questions about enforcement include monitoring mobilization, weapons supplies, and violations across the 2,000-kilometer front line. Demands for discussions with the U.S. to address these logistical challenges. Putin's conditions aim to disarm Ukraine strategically while preserving Russia's military advantages. The Kremlin's approach rejects the U.S.-Ukrainian proposal for a renewable 30-day ceasefire focused on de-escalation, instead framing the pause as a precursor to negotiations that would force Ukrainian concession. Well, this is kind of interesting what AI has produced here. It's pretty much what we've talked about. There's a couple of new things there I hadn't thought about. And I think Putin has pretty well, already made it very clear what they will and what they won't accept. So, a couple of more things here. I got a question about Mexico. Many people in Mexico have said in the past that Mexico only has one problem. It's history and its geography. Meaning that Mexico would probably love to be a part of BRICS, but they feel the weight of their northern neighbor is too heavy for them to express that wish freely. Mexico, of course, would love to expand its export market to all the BRICS nations with the tax incentives that are there. But Mexico depends so much upon the United States. The United States is not about to let Mexico go in the direction of BRICS. It's unfortunate that Secretary of State Rubio's first goes to Panama to try to convince the government there to cancel the memorandum of understanding with the BRI. Then President Trump said he wants to take the two ports of the Panama Canal. These are obvious things which are not yet the way that they should be, but I think if you go back to the migrant question, this idea that you have to ship people back as illegal immigrants is just prolonging the misery because it doesn't get to the real root causes of why these people, as soon as they get home, are going to turn around and come back to the United States. I mean, if all the big projects of Latin America would be realized, it would be easy if we, to convince the United States to not chase China out of the southern hemisphere, but to cooperate with China. Because the projects are so big, and if you want to do that kind of infrastructure development, which was envisioned already by Alexander von Humboldt, we are way behind the realization of all of that. For example, the Bioceanic Railway connecting the Atlantic and Pacific is the beginning of the development of infrastructure arteries which could open up the entire Latin American continent for development. The Monroe Doctrine, I think, is very much misunderstood as having some imperial design to it. In reality, it was an effort to keep the European colonial powers out of Latin America at the time. But the reality of the Monroe Doctrine has been distorted a lot. I think the solution is if many efforts are being made to establish a new security and development architecture, I think then the problem can be solved under that umbrella. China and Russia wanting to help develop Central and South American countries aren't doing it in order to establish Russian and Chinese military positions in these countries, which obviously would be against the Monroe Doctrine. They're there to help develop these nations because these nations have raw materials that would benefit China and Russia. And that's all that people pushing for the BRICS has had to say about the America's involvement in this as well. It's right here in our own continent. Well, covered an awful lot of stuff here. But I'm still a fan of thinking of the BRICS in that sense. Trump, who's a businessman, Trump is a businessman who likes to make deals. And if he would be interested in exporting productive things instead of having the military-industrial complex go haywire with everything he says, there would be a conflict on the resolution of that question. But you kind of have to stop. You kind of have to stop, and we have to be clear about what this military-industrial complex is something that simply needs to be outlawed and banned. It's a relic of the barbaric stage of human development. For example, if Trump, who is a businessman who likes to make deals, would be interested in exporting productive things instead of be at the beck and call of the military-industrial complex, is becoming more and more a topic in these countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. So you just have to, I mean, everything produced for the military is a destruction of the physical economy. Eisenhower, you remember the statements of Eisenhower on this? Every dollar that's spent on the military is less of a dollar into the mouths of the children of America, because that money should be spent on physical economy. You can't eat the money that goes into the military-industrial complex. Your stock options might increase. Your portfolio might get worth more money. But it's something that's taking away from those areas where these people's lives need to be made better than they are right now, having these things stolen from them. This is a tremendous moment in history where we find ourselves. We're experiencing the end. We are experiencing the end of an epic, the end of 500 years of colonialism, where for the first time the realistic possibility exists that the countries of the global South can overcome poverty and underdevelopment and take their fate into their own hands. That's because the economic power of the BRICS is now a partner. And that is a revolutionary change, which is one of the most important changes in the last 2 decades. The fact that so many people have been living shorter, brutish lives. I mean, life expectancy has been very short compared to the so-called North, and that's simply not fair. I mean, every human being born on this planet is an incredible enrichment. And the whole idea of overpopulation was one of the most satanic ideas ever produced by the Malthusian oligarchy. And the reality is the opposite. Every newborn baby could be a Confucius, could be a Plato, could be an Einstein, could be a new Beethoven. I mean, naturally never the same, because genius is always very unique, but I'm convinced that the future of humanity could be incredibly rich if we provide every newborn child the opportunity to develop his or her potential capabilities to the fullest. And the past damnation of this colonialism that's gone on for hundreds of years. I mean, this past history is going to be characterized as the infancy of mankind, where people related to each other like a bunch of nasty little boys kicking and fighting each other like they do sometimes when they're 4 years old, that we have to leave behind us. I think if man truly becomes human, we have to relate to each other as human beings. You don't give up your sovereignty. You don't give up your defense of your nation. You don't do any of that stuff. America stays America. Britain stays Britain. But these undeveloped third world countries, as they're called, and they're undeveloped because the International Monetary Fund wouldn't give them any development money, so that they had to stay poor so we could steal their resources from them. But if you compare where we are today to where we were 20,000 years ago, which from the standpoint of the history of this universe is just a tiny moment, but for mankind a rather long period. But 20,000 years from now, we will be absolutely more developed than we can possibly imagine, and if we can do that as nations together instead of this damn colonialism that's slowed down the production of mankind for so long. Anyway, it looks like we're out of time. We're coming to the end of the program. I'm going to cut off what I'm doing here at K-Talk and bring my stream to an end here, Global Affairs Unfiltered. I've got a bunch more stuff for you, cutting news for tomorrow. I will see you all then. Thanks for being a part of the stream.